Hello humans, hello humans. Hang on a second. Gotta mess with this software. It's June 21, early in the AM. And welcome to the time zone. So I've got a complexity to discuss today, and all complexities are the complexity, which is the ontology, of which you are a small fraction, encapsulated in the illusion of flesh. Anyway, so this is a thing about redefinitions. That's where I'm going to start off. I'll just start off right there. So I'm in a new place. I have to have a background that provides me some level of obscurity as to where I am. I can let you know it happens to be raining, raining at the moment. I'm a little beat up from all of the moving crap. There are just tons of stuff associated with it. But I've got us moved, the majority of it. There is a bunch more still yet to do, but enough to start building out a life here, right? And so I have to do the obscuring of where I'm at in order to delay discovery of that location, because Heidi and I share a stalker, and then I have my own stalkers. so I could loan her one if she needed one. But in any event, though, so I just don't want to. Let me turn the gain down a bit here. As I say, I'm groaning a bit because of the exertion of moving everything. So anyway, Heidi and I share a stalker. I've got my own, and so we're somewhere in the American continent. That's as far as I can tell you, and it happens to be raining. In any event, though, it's a nice new place, and there's stuff to do. I've had to shuffle equipment like mad. I thought I had a good setup, but I can't get my Wi-Fi to extend to the studio area, so I've got to work that out. And then I couldn't find like my new laptops. Couldn't find anything. I still can't find my stash of batteries. It'll all turn up. There's still bins to be sorted through and stuff like that. Anyway, though, so I've got us moved, and in the majority, in enough to begin with. And this is a video to pick up from the point of departure of the last video before the move. And as I say, this is about redefining. So okay, so Heidi thought that where she had lived was rural. And it wasn't rural by my definition, because where I lived was rural, I assumed, right? I had to go to the post office. There was no mail delivery, any of that kind of stuff. It was an hour to get to the nearest point of civilization at all, that sort of thing. So I had to redefine my understanding of rural. And so I put a qualifier. She used to live in urban rural, okay? And now I understand that I truly lived in the wilderness. Now that I'm back sort of closer to some of humanity. Anyway, so I have to redefine these definitions. And this is something that we all have to go through at this point. This is the area that we're in now, based on events, based on temporal markers, right? So it wasn't really able to be anticipated based on temporal markers that were calendar based. So I knew we were going to come to this point. I had anticipated it was part of the summer of emergence. So like summer, right? From today onward is officially summer, but if you were in Russia, it's from the 1st of June onward, that sort of thing, right? And so you have a season. In this particular case, I just had a temporal area. That temporal area was bounded by certain temporal markers to events and the combination of events to a layer within our current complexity. but I didn't know where that layer would show up relative to the calendar. So, but we're into it now. This is what's called the time zone. And it's not like, Pacific time zone or Atlantic time zone or, European or any of that kind of stuff. Not relative to the transition there of the sun across the planet. But this time zone was described as being that point where humans encountered encountered a number of things. Okay, so let's just put it into another term. This was the time zone is that point within the summer of emergence when humans discover that they are involved in that emergence. So the concept is that the time zone begins as we start understanding that we don't know anything about time, and that we're in a period of events pouring out of the event stream that are going to force us to examine and redefine our concepts that had been fundamental to us, right? Now there's various layers here. So I wish I had the whiteboard so I could, draw you markers and that kind of stuff, but just basically, I think that at this point, the time zone was an attempt by the ontology, by way of the data, to describe that we would come to a point where we would shed those fundamental precepts that we had brought with us from the Kali Yuga. So it's related to time at that level as well, right? That there's time involved at every step. This is a fractal universe. This is sort of a fractal complexity, as above, so below kind of thing. But it's also the above is created by the growing complexity off of simple forms that emerges from below. And so we're in a point of emergence. Part of that emergence is going to be our understanding that we don't know a whole lot about any fucking thing. Okay. And so we're going to shed things like Darwinism. And so the people like Brett Weinstein and his wife Heather Hang, two very astute minds, are going to have to come to terms with the fact that there's literally millions and millions of objects around the earth that say that humans did not evolve the way that their mainstream science suggests. That 40,000 years ago, we were not cave people, okay? And that all that stuff is basically has to be thrown away because so much of our paradigm is told to us one way, instructed to us one way, and yet there's evidence everywhere that that's not the case. So we are not the most advanced civilization on the planet. There was Tartaria, and the powers that be had us as humanity destroying Tartaria without being aware of it and aware of what we were participating in. So I had and I have a personal family knowledge of this. I had a relative who lived, a distant older relative who lived on the coast of California during the last depression. And in that depression, early in that depression, so actually, it was in the 1920s, okay? And he was paid $1 a day to haul giant bones on sailing ships from the coast of California out towards Catalina, where they were pitched over the side. And these were the bones of actual human giants. And this was like a family truism. We knew it, no one would ever suggest that this particular uncle would ever fabricate. And that's how he made his living through this period of the 20s, and he was paid that fantastic sum of $1 a day when the going rate for general labor, even on sailing ships, was 25 cents, a quarter of a dollar a day. And so the part, of course, of this was you were supposed to keep your mouth shut about what you were doing. And he got that job because of his wife's cousin's association with Freemasons, and it was for the Smithsonian. And so they were destroying our past, even in his actions. And yet he was an unwitting but willing participant in that. He probably did not really think far out as to what the implication of this would be for his descendants, right? And so in this video here, I'll put a link on the bottom at Substack that goes to a particular tweet that I retweeted today because it's very pertinent. Anyway, so in the time zone, people are going to do things at one level of physics, and I'm involved, hang on a second, with this book I've got here, Irreducible, by Federico, and a physicist, and it's quite good. And I'm in the early part of it where he's recounting the how did we get here kind of part. And so here, and it struck me, right, because I'm reading it and I'm external to the whole thing, and I already understand the ontology, and I'm reading about the gritologists slowly making their way up to me, right? So it's as though I'm on top of the hill and I'm overlooking the whole valley and everything, and yet I'm reading their description from last year. It was published last year, of their wandering through the forest to get up to the hill to the ontology. And so I had this overview of it. And one of the things that struck me was that, damn, he didn't go back very far. That if I had tried to do that same encapsulation of history, I probably would have gone back as far as as Plato and Socrates, and in that area, right? And we've got to be careful in using years. So I'm one of those people that believes that there's an extra 1,000 years that has been stuck into our history on one side, and then I think there's been another 2,000 years stuck in there on the other side, back a little bit further. And so that we're not as far advanced as a species on this planet as we believe. In any event, so if I had started his book that way, I would have gone back further. He only starts in the 1920s with significant developments, which also brought up the thinking of my relative, right? About my relative. Obscuring history. And here Federico is trying to extract meaningful information from history. And then if you look at it in the broad context, yes, he's talking about over 100 years ago, but that's a very narrow slice of our total humanity. And even though it's about 1/3 of all of our of humanity's thinking about solid science investigating this reality. So we haven't been at that very long. We've basically only been involved with it in a general sense since the 1700s. Prior to that, indeed, there were people that thought about it. But relative to the much smaller mass of humanity, they were even more rare. Okay, so the philosophers and these people that were ultimately going to lead to the creation of the Academy of Science, and especially the Academy of Physical Science, were extremely rare. They started coming into their own in the 1700s in what we think of as the medieval ages, which I think they were. I think it really was the 700s and not 1700s. I think they threw in that there's another 1,000 years in there. This goes back to this idea that our evolution is not as we've been told, and Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, brilliant in many ways, can't be held liable for their misunderstanding because they're educated or they're schooled, right? So their minds have been formed, and they can't breach the idea that humanity is a new species perhaps on this planet that had a remnant of something else, Tartaria, for instance. And then there's the pyramid cultures. So we've found hundreds of thousands of pyramids. Well, for sure, over 10,000 pyramids on the planet. And now we find that the big structures are underneath the pyramids in Giza. And there's likely some under the pyramids in Mesoamerica. Look at how they... also, by the way, let me point out we have to redefine things a lot these days. So this is an adaptation of what's called the Mercator projection, where you take the globe and flatten it out. So this area up here that's defined as Russia is magnified in its expanse. If we actually were to shrink it and see it relative to things, it would be small enough that it wouldn't even span across all of Africa. So we have to continually remind ourselves that the complexity we live in has representations that are not factual. They're just there to get you so far, right? And our language is like that as well. This is why we get into this redefinition. Why Heidi thought that she lived rural, and I thought it was urban based on where I was, right? Because it's all relative to our positioning there. Anyway, so, all right, so we're going to get into defining time and the rest of our physical reality in different ways as we go forward, because, and that will indeed involve redefining our past in order to proceed to what we conceive of as a future. And this is because we're under attack. Humanity is being attacked, it's been escalated to the point where if you looked at it a particular way, you can see the battles in what we used to think of as the ancient past, morphs all the way through, you know, all the periods of Genghis Khan and all of these kind of guys, which even that is a myth, the way it's presented. He was actually the Khan of Tartaria, the king of Tartaria. In any event, though, so and then we get up to like modern warfare, vast mass movements, and mostly the people involved in the mass movements are totally ignorant of what's going on and only see this little tiny bit, and they're being engineered into these giant slaughters. You know, the Spanish flu that came out, all of these other attacks on humanity as a whole, the depopulation agenda, and now they're rushing it forward. So in rushing it forward, we, victims of it, have to ask why. One possible reason in the complexity that presents itself is that humanity is actually waking up. That the internet has allowed some free minds to cross-pollinate with other minds and induce those minds to be more free in their thought. More free of the restriction that's been laid on us by our enemy that is currently trying to chemtrail us out of existence and so on. And this is a complexity, because if you go and suddenly wake up a normie and they see the chemtrails, which I've done before, some normies, actually, a couple of them that I've dealt with actually say, no, I don't want to know about that. I don't want to know. Others were just flabbergasted. They never ever really looked up and understood what was happening. And then they start asking questions, right? And the first thing that they'll do is they'll start hitting all these other parts of the complexity that our enemy, those that are the enemy that is trying to make us extinct, has put out there. So they think in terms of complexity, this enemy, all right? And so they put out layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of deception over their apparent actions. So you can find chemtrails, and then you say, who's doing this evil thing? And then you ask, why is it being done? And then what effects has it on us, right? Does it have on us? And so when you go to look at the who, you run into all these layers, none of which are really meaningful. Yes, there's weather modification companies, and many of those are useful idiots. They have no idea as to what the grander scheme in which they're participating. But you'll note some curious things. If you go and look at all their HR rosters, their pilots are in the main, you know, maybe 90% of all their pilots are young men with no children. And so anyway, so there's layers of deception and misdirection that are applied on everything as you get into this understanding. But the ontology, I believe, wants to support humanity and wants to give us an awareness of this such that we can fight back and overcome. I think it wants our success. And so I'm proceeding on that basic principle, that the ontology is supporting me as a human, and thus all humans are also supported because of the ontology and the way it works. And that ontology will provide me what I need as I go along. Sort of like as a character in a video game. You don't expect the player up there to just leave you hanging, right? They're there to motivate you and keep moving and stuff. And so that's a good analogy for where we're at. But anyway, so we're redefining everything, and we have to keep this attitude. It's much more important that we not settle on a new definition, that instead, the most important aspect of that is to keep open this idea of uncertainty, that you don't really know, right? You think you have some hints that point you at particular things, but you can't really see the larger aspect of things. And so, in the book here, which is a scientific view of consciousness, life, and computers by the guy who came up with the silicon chip, based on activating crystals at a micro level, he notes a real truism that you can never describe, none of the physicists in the world ever will be able to describe consciousness with mathematics in a physical sense, because it's not physical. But that's not the real reason they can't do it, because you can describe all kinds of non-physical things with mathematics, but the real reason you can't describe consciousness with mathematics is because mathematics derives from consciousness. And being within consciousness, it's not possible for it to be to see consciousness from the outside and provide an accurate description. And that's where humans are, okay? So we are within the complexity of the ontology. And so we can only describe the ontology from looking up, so to speak, right? And so we'll see the complexity from the inside in a way. And we'll never be able to see the complexity from the grander, greater view. Accepting that, there's still things that we can determine and conclusions that we can make that are both valid and practical and useful to us, right? Knowing that there's going to be, all right, so some things we can determine just from the presentation of universe itself. The idea of quantum computers and the idea of quantum mechanics and stuff involves this thing that this guy Planck came up with, which was the idea of the smallest possible action. Smallest possible, for any given action, the smallest possible movement or dynamism of energy involved. And this was the Planck minimum, right? It's the minimal action that's energy expenditure that's required to get any kind of an action. That also extends into perception and understanding. And so we can define qualia, which is a definition of a quantum attribute. We can define qualia as the minimum amount of energy or action or expression that is required to get across a concept. And so, like all quantum things, you can understand that qualia build a complexity upon themselves, just as quantum builds a complexity upon itself to present us with our three-dimensional material reality, all right? Just as so basically here's the whole encapsulation of that, the first third of that book. And it comes down to this. Scientists used to think that atoms made up everything and that atoms were little solid balls. And now they don't think they're little solid balls. They think they're an illusion presented by frequencies of energy moving very fast. There you go. That's the first part of that. Scientists no longer believe that atoms are little solid balls, and relativistic rational materialism is gone. And they now think that it's all energy, and they can't figure out a whole lot about it, but it's good because that means there's so much more to discover yet, and you can be able to manipulate things at a greater level. Thus we have qubits and stuff like that. Okay, so basically, our physics is in its infancy. If we look at our own history, then we're in our infancy, because we should not be able to, if theoretically we've been discussing this kind of stuff since, 600 BC, and theoretically there was another 1,000 years in there, we ought to be way more advanced, right? And why were there the Dark Ages? Why didn't people think in that period of time? Anyway, so there's so much evidence that our history is presented to us as lies, if you start looking, you start seeing that all of our history is lies, and it's all obscuring something else. And at the same time, I'll look to the X tweet here I'll put in this video. We're under assault in probably 2 more generations. And they have agents. So, you know, why would there be political aggression in America against an idea of a healthy population? Just on the face of it, right? And you could bitch and moan about various aspects of the definition of health, but why are you against a healthy population? The Mayha thing, right? So on the face of it, we're now coming up to this point where even our own actions here within the Wu community, examined from this viewpoint of where we are within the complexity itself, are part of the ontology telling us stuff. So you get that idea. Your own actions, the things that you do, should be examined with the idea that they're being prompted by a greater ontology and the greater movements, because all you have is the only thing you can actually do is to decide and make an action. And usually we'll always take the most minimal expenditure of energy in our actions. Anyway, so examining our own actions in the Wu community, we see that, well, we're waking up to greater degrees, and we see that is spreading throughout the rest of of humanity, especially the internet-connected humanity. Hang on a second. I had to smoke a bunch of pot for my pain in my ligaments from all the lifting and hauling. You know, I'm old, right? So working for 3 weeks at this, literally picking up and moving a whole house, it affects you. Anyway, so here we are, is the Wu people are starting to become like complexity scientists by studying their own consciousness, applying that study to their own actions, and getting both a feedback and a feed-forward loop going relative to the emergence out of the event stream. And this summer is the summer of emergence. And this is a lead-in to the to Sci-Fi world. A necessary part. In this part of Sci-Fi world for the next 25 years or so, it is a period of redefinition. So we've passed 25 years, and this is 25th year of it. It's ending. As it ends, we're out of the destruction phase, or the chaos phase that induces the destruction phase. And so in the next 25 years, we're in the destruction phase, but it's not as you might think, because it's not like we're going to go and, you know, blow everything up. We've been doing that. At their behest, we've been destroying Tartaria. If you just get on X and just look up Tartaria, you're going to be blown away. This 25 years of destruction is the destruction of the illusion, and then the next 25 years is this incredible outpouring of creativity as humanity starts in on this innovation boom that is just going to be nonstop and continuous for probably thousands of years, especially relative to the Kali Yugas, or to the Yugas where we're at now. Anyway, in this destruction phase, we're going to be redefining everything. And so, in my opinion, the way to approach this is we enter into the time zone where we're actually going to be redefining what does time mean, and discovering that there is no future. There is only the continuous event stream and the flow of karma that is, or the generation of karma by our actions that come back to us in this feedback and feed forward loop. As part of consciousness, as we get into that, we can redefine all of our concepts of reality, all of our base concepts, and fit all the pieces in a lot better form. Because when you approach it from an ontological view, you don't have to assemble all of the grit to have everything make sense. You have everything make sense, and then you see how that applies to the grit. And so it's a much easier way to do science, in my opinion. Anyway, so physics is truly in its infancy, and it's coming into the destruction phase where we'll do away with the idea of physics And we're going to do away with the old idea of psychism. Okay, so so the real ancients, going back, take that 1,000 years out of there and just go back 1,000 years and be talking about, the real philosophers who sat around and initiated the beginning of mathematics and stuff, considered all of manifesting reality as something that emanated from the psychic aspects of our personalities and our being, right? And so they knew it to be a projection at some level. Now, this begs so many questions, throws so many questions at us, right? Why were these individuals in that period of time pondering such fundamental aspects of reality, and yet living among the pyramids and all of these ancient structures? In India, Angkor Wat, Göbekli Tepe, and all of these places, right? So it would seem, one could conclude, that our modern humanity was placed in and we find some evidence of that with the mud flood stuff, especially relative to Tartaria. We find some other evidence in the great valleys in the Hindu area in India, where there's remnants of civilizations that lasted 1,000 years that had no weapons, and all the houses were basically the same size. It appeared to be an egalitarian society and all of this sort of thing, right? But there's these weird oddities, again, that suggest the humans were not part, or modern humans, our current form, was not part of that past. And so if we look at the Tartaria, in the Tartarian buildings, we find that they had free energy. They apparently harvested basically what we would think of as static electromagnetic, or the electromagnetic base frequencies out of the atmosphere, and conducted them through the ground and took it off for their heating and cooling needs. But here's the thing: Tartarian buildings, insofar as we can discover, have no bathrooms, no plumbing. No, they had no running water. They had no kitchens. There was no food preservation areas that can be discerned from the examination of these buildings now. And it is not as though the destruction of the buildings, because we still have a number of them, especially in India and places outside the reach of the Western republics to a great extent. But when you go and look at them, they're quite odd. They're very fascinating. They have all kinds of, especially in India, they have some fantastic aspects and attributes to them, and they theoretically are made out of stone, although if you really look at it, it appears to be formed of polymer, concrete kind of a thing, so extruded or like 3D printing or something like that. And so there's all of these megalith structures we can't duplicate now, and it goes on and on and on to the point that you're actually probably close to millions of examples that humans did not evolve as the evolutionists and the Darwinianists would have us understand. And that we were, and then you start again asking questions about these simple pieces of evidence that the complexity provides you. And so the ontology provides us with these pyramids we can't explain. The further we investigate into them, the more we discover that we were mistaken initially. Now we are discovering that they may be power plants, but we don't really know what the fuck, or what kind of power, or what the point was, etc., right? And you can speculate, and you can get some level of speculation to a certain point, but now that we're starting to become more awakened in a general sense, and that the woo is spreading, right? This was something that was in the data, even back as far as like 2001 and 2, was this coming paradigm shift that, and everybody was talking about it in the form of and concentrating on that surface level of the complexity, which is the internet, right? But they were not really contemplating that, and they were talking about the internet changing people, but they were thinking of it as they added complexity to it. They would think of it as altering our economic situation, which it did, bringing in just-in-time deliveries, which it did, et cetera, et cetera. But those are not the most profound, nor the end result, nor the ultimate effect. And another yet much more profound effect was the impact of the internet on human consciousness and the spread of ideas. Nothing is more powerful than an idea. In fact, communism is not a thing. Communism is an ideology, and an ideology. It's a worship of an idea. So all it takes is an idea, and you can transform humanity. Thus, you see aspects of that transformation in how our enemy is using parts of humanity to. And one must ask oneself, if you're thinking about it, why should this occur? How did they do that? What were the mechanisms that allowed them to do this? Was it entirely social? Was it electromagnetic? And it's when you start noticing the weird associations of things like the first spread of transcontinental telegraph lines being exactly coincident with the first outbreak of flu ever, as a social thing. And so then you look at the spread of other diseases, and you see how indeed most of these things are induced. And so the ontology would prefer us to be healthy, but our enemies, the Cathari and the two principal people, labeled as the demiurge, that is disincarnate evil that doesn't like humanity, would have us succumb to all of these things, right? The demiurge would have us go away. And it appears that the demiurge right now is running the chemtrail planes, operating big pharma, big food, every damn thing, big government. But the good news is that the battle is becoming evident. People are becoming aware and awake, and the ontology is the driving force of that. So we have the ontology versus the demiurge. So at one level, humanity is just yet another proxy war. Maybe we're getting closer to the actual point of manipulation, or an actual point of manipulation from the enemy through humanity against us, because a lot of that does seem to be engineered by the Israelis and going back through them through Jewish lineage. And of course, you can't blame the Jews for not seeing it that way, because they're inside it. So, they are great mathematicians, but they'll never be able to describe consciousness, because the mathematics is within and derives from consciousness. And so it'll never have a grand enough vision, so to speak, to be able to include consciousness in its calculations. And this is where we're at this stage. This is the time zone. We're going to be redefining time, redefining our history, destroying much of the illusions of our history that have been laid upon us. This is going to be very traumatic for people. That level of trauma is going to emerge in the summer. It's going to hit us this next month. Personally, I don't expect, and I'm not really worried about, that would be the termination point of the Israeli mistake. If we do have that, and the Israelis strike that particular, all the way down to Australia, and into a great deal of Asia, if that occurs, that's the end of the war, right? Thereafter, in the data sets, nobody would deal with Israel in any way, shape, or form. Their electricity systems get shut off. Nobody will deliver oil to them. They won't sell them food, any of this shit. I see that there is the ontology pushing the Trumpitos, Putin, even Xi, into a situation to derail that, right? And this may indeed be all part of the great plan that was discussed in the Q documents. And we'll see. We'll see how it emerges. I'm very nonplussed. It's not going to be a big thing, right? There's going to be lots of drama and some level of trauma in between, and then in my opinion it will fade away as we get into these larger issues that will emerge from it. Now remember, even success at this level, so even Trump the peacemaker emerging out of the theater of Trump the warrior, is going to have big consequences at emotional levels over July. And then we'll have a slight sag in August, and then we'll be back into it in September. And so if one wanted to step way back and look at inward on the complexity and the time or the duration of things happening, one could postulate that over July we will have this I don't want to say euphoria, but a building tension that will be more on the happy side than on the negative side, right? And building tension levels are indeterminate. How we react to them as humans is up to us, and we may have a good time. So you can have, a party is building tension in a happy way, right? It can end good or bad. That's a separate issue entirely. But I think in September and October and November, we're going to get into this really rough period in the time zone where a lot of people have to face the. So there'll be two reactions, two very broad camps of reaction, and then I'll shut this off. One set of reaction is going to come from those people that are involved, where they'll have some level of awareness of their own involvement, and they won't feel very good about that. So there'll be that sort of a reaction. I don't know that they'll suddenly cut off all their blue hair or, try and, but there will be a big backlash within that group because their emotionality is very heightened by their service to the demiurge. They will have this somewhat heightened level of emotional backlash. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that kind of a backlash against their former masters in terms of, that sort of thing. Then there's going to be the other group that's going to be coming to awareness of the enemy, and you're going to see all different kinds of, and the attacks on humanity, and you're going to see all different kinds of these responses within this much larger group that will be redirecting people into a religious response. That's going to be sort of temporary. It'll be problematic and frothy. It'll have a lot of emotionality involved. It'll extend through until January or February of next year as part of our time zone, because within the big religious response, there's going to be a level of degradation as the emergence of an ontological paradigm within science starts to affect the religions themselves, okay? Religion does not stand alone. It did sort of stand alone when science was in its nascent form as basically physical philosophy, a philosophical description of our physical reality. And then eventually that support took over and started supporting and changed religions. And so religions can be expected to change as the scientific paradigm in which they exist changes. That scientific paradigm is now changing, as we see from more and more books, going to various levels of using various words to describe the ontology. So all of these books are the Gritologists using Gritology language to try and describe consciousness, and so that's why they flail around. That's why, as mathematics, they can't describe consciousness. Their language is inadequate because they are starting from a Gritology viewpoint. And all of that is in the process of changing. So we'll see more books like that come on out. We'll see more views of the ontology and things being presented by the Gritologist from an ontological perspective forward. It'll be tainted because they're still Gritologists, because they're still speaking with a Gritology paradigm imposed on their mind, but even they are breaking free of it. In this process of the science breaking free, it will affect the religions. In the process of the religions being affected, there will be a lot of turmoil. This goes back to the forecasts in the old Alta reports of the battles and the mega churches. It didn't define the battles, that is to say, the philosophical nature of why the churches were splitting up and having battles within them, that kind of thing, but it just noted it as an example of the building tension and that kind of stuff. And so we're at that period now. Out of this period is going to emerge over these next 25 years in a very solid way, an entirely different understanding of our reality that, good for me, will allow us to engineer relatively cool stuff like anti-gravity vehicles and things, right? But note that in this next 25 years, it will be more accepted that we are indeed now in this period of recognizing that we're under attack, recognizing that our species is being, they're attempted, someone, somewhere, an enemy is attempting to make us all extinct within like 2 generations. This is that great battle, I think, that I was promised a chance to die in. I don't think I'm coming back from that one, right? You people are dragging me down anyway, but that process is a real bitch. You know, it takes you a long time to come back. But anyway, so I'm feeling more fit. And so that'll also is a temporal marker because that's my nature, right? To exercise. My body is trained to it. It's all fake. And so she goes off and she does smart shit, all right? So she doesn't get involved in this crap. So anyway, but what she's really saying is it's all orchestrated. And indeed it is, right? And so in that sense, it is fake. It's all theater. There is a reason for the theater. The woo people can skip that reason because that reason is to wake up the normies, to wake up humanity at an organized way in a slow enough pace that they're not going to freak and revert to frantic monkeyness, right? It won't allow monkey mind to take over. Anyway, so that's where we're at now. In my thinking, this is a really good period here. I'm going to, settle into my new house and my new life with Heidi and stuff, and get everything skookum here as the events and circumstances mature and emerge from the event stream in this summer of emergence. And then I'll make some more videos as we go forward about these key areas that are associated with the old temporal markers. But we're coming to a period of time where the events and everybody's waking up is going to rush us into things, and maybe that'll start in July. July certainly is an elevated level of tension over right now, and I wanted to tell people that in my opinion, in my interpretation, that elevated tension is not related to the emergence. But that war does not, in my opinion, does not show up in any of the data sets or any of the tension levels that are expressed in the charts I've put out. I think other sets of upsetting and disruptive events are going to emerge, and we'll all have to respond to them and make decisions and then go on and start more karma and shit. Anyway, guys, so anyway, take pity on the normies. You're going to say Tartaria, and they're going to say, huh? So anyway, I'll make another one of these in a while.